Hey there friends, welcome back to the channel. Sorry about all the spy stuff, but if you know me, I'm a big fan of James Bond, the original novels and the movies. And actually, the release of Daniel Craig's Casino Royale really took me a while to get back into and accept Craig as Bond. But if you'll remember that iconic opening scene shot beautifully in black and white. And the best part is that these days you can shoot the same film stock that sequence was shot on, but in your still cameras. I'm of course talking about the iconic Eastman Double-X 522. But no film comes out of nowhere, especially these days. And the history of 522 is actually kind of unique. So let's take a look at that first before we actually get out and review this film stock. From Schindler's List to Casino Royale, The Lighthouse, Oppenheimer, Paper Moon, and many more, there's a good chance that if you've watched a movie that was shot on black and white film, you've seen Eastman Double-X in action. But no film comes out of a void, so where did Double-X come from, and what makes it so unique in today's film photography world? To fully understand where Eastman Double-X comes from, we have to go all the way back to 1933. Now, 1933 is important because that was when Kodak introduced the 135 standard. Now, 35mm film had been around since the earliest days of the 20th century, but it was primarily used within cinematography. It wasn't until the invention and introduction of the Leica that using 35mm film in still photography became popular. In 1933, Eastman Kodak released their first 35mm film using their 135 standard called Panatomic X, another favorite of mine. The trouble is that in the early 20th century, if you wanted fine grain, you shot a slow film. If you wanted fast film, you needed to take it with a little bit of extra grain. And as you know, Panatomic X is not exactly the fastest film in the stable. So, just before the American entry into World War II in December of 1941, Kodak released their first high-speed film called Super XX. It's an ASA 200 film that was known for a very coarse grain. Super XX remained the flagship film from Eastman Kodak until the introduction of Tri-X in 1954. And at that point, Super XX was relegated to be used only in sheet film formats. So the motion picture side of things looked at Super XX and realized that Kodak had something really good there. And after a bit of modifications to, reduce that coarseness in the grain, in 1959 they released Eastman Double-X 522. And it's pretty much stayed the same formulation as its initial release in 1959, making it only one of a few films still in production today that has not changed from its original formula. So my first experience shooting Double-X came in 2012. I'd picked up a few rolls after being... My first experience with Eastman Double-X came in 2012. I picked up a few rolls after it was recommended in an episode of the Film Photography Project, and where you could get the stock that had been respooled into 35mm cassettes. I shot it through the spring and summer of that year, an abandoned rayon plant, Doors Open Toronto, and Boston. For developing, I ended up sending it away to the Old School Photo Lab in New Hampshire, and because it was a motion picture film, and this was before shooting motion picture film in your still cameras became popular, there wasn't a lot of developing times available outside of the motion picture industry, specifically the use of Kodak D96. Eventually, between a little bit of back and forth between myself and the lab, we settled on using Kodak HC110. And the results weren't bad. They definitely weren't my favorite, but I had a feeling that this was a good film, and I don't like 200 speed films. I don't know what it is about them. There's only a handful that I actually like to shoot, and Eastman Double-X is one of those. Since then, I was able to transition from sending my black and white work out to a lab to doing it at home, thanks to the folks at Burlington Camera. And I started playing around with development. D76, DK50, FA1027 all come to mind as developers that stand out in my head as being really good to use with Double-X. And then the real kicker was in 2021 when CineStill, who had been selling respooled Kodak motion picture films, including Double-X in their BWXX branding, in medium format, specifically 120. And I rediscovered my love for this film stock. The richness, the amazing sharpness, and that stunning mid-century grain structure that you really don't see in modern films. So that's enough of a tease. Let's actually get out and start shooting CineStill BWXX or Eastman Double-X, specifically in 120. Okay, so for this review, I'm going to be shooting 4 rolls of CineStill BWXX in 120 format. I'll be shooting it through an on-loan Pentax 672 from my good friend James Lee here in Oakville, Ontario. I'll be developing it in Dalzell 76 from the Film Photography Project, Ilford Ilfotec HC, Adox Rodinal, and Compard R09 Studional, a new developer that I'm going to be using with Double-X. Without further ado, let's get back into that trench coat and get out into the field. Okay, so we are going to be starting our journey here at Burnett Park in Oakville, Ontario. It's an area of Oakville called Kerr Village. It's west of the 16 Mile Creek and Oakville Harbor. And I'm going to be shooting the Double-X, rating it at ASA 250 and developing it in FPP's Dalzell 76 using a 1:1 dilution. It's only fair that I use this D76 clone because the FPP was one of the earliest adopters and sellers of respooled Eastman Double-X for still photography specifically. All right, I'm going to be using the legendary 105mm f2.4 lens for this roll, and that's enough. Let's walk and talk.
While the obvious first choice for Eastman Double-X is Kodak D96, the average home photographer may not have this specialty motion picture chemical in their tool, although recently it has become far more accessible than when I first started working with Double-X. But the one thing that almost everyone can get their hands on is Kodak D76, or one of its many clones. While I've never developed using the stock solution, I've found that you get the best results with either a 1+1 or a 1+2 dilution. It all depends on what level of contrast you want, so it's very easy to tailor it for the conditions of exposure. Drop it to 1.2 in high contrast and 1.1 for medium. No matter what you use, you'll end up getting excellent contrast with bright whites, clean blacks, and a full range of midtones. Exactly what you'd expect from a motion picture film. There is a bit more grain than you're probably used to, but it adds edge sharpness, and it has a lovely mid-century structure and look.
Okay, so that's all 10 frames shot. Now, I did want to end this a little closer to the harbor to make the transition to next roll a lot better. But unfortunately, there is a lot of construction going on right now in the area of Shipyard Park here in Oakville. But no matter, the roll's shot, ready to go into the tank, and I'm ready to take you to the other side of the harbor where we're gonna shoot roll number 2. All right, on to roll number 2. I'm going to be exposing the roll of BWXX at ASA 200 and developing it in Ilford Ilfotec HC using a 1:63 dilution, or dilution H in Kodak parlance. And the lens I'm going to be using is my favorite, the 55mm f3.5 for the Pentax 6.7. I'm starting here east of Oakville Harbor at the Urchless Estate, so let's get walking.
Controlling contrast with Eastman Double-X is easy. You just have to use Ilford Ilfotec HC or Kodak HC110 or any number of the clones. However, there are some sacrifices that you need to make, specifically regarding the visible grain. If you're looking for a hard, harsh contrast, go with dilution B or 1:31, and you'll get a compressed tonal range with close to true black and white images. Not advised under hard contrasty light, but in a low contrast situation, it might help bump things up. The payoff, a lot more visible grain than what you're probably used to, and it might turn you off using Double-X. Now, if you want to get more out of your midtones and soften that contrast up, especially in hard light, I recommend using dilution H or 1:63. The first time I pulled negatives out of the tank, I could see I had a roll of winners. You get to keep those clean white and black points, and you have an increased long tonal range. And the best part is that the grain is much more reduced, but you get a bit more edge sharpness. Of course, the payoff is that you're going to be doing a 12-minute development, but you can shorten that by going with constant rotation.
Okay, so that wraps up roll number 2. I'm going to meet you in a little further up at Georgia Square for roll number 3. A developer you may not always think is a good choice for Double-X. Okay, roll number 3, and one of the things that I never thought would look good with Double-X is Rodinal, but in medium format it absolutely sings. So I'm going to be rating this roll at ASA 250 and developing it in a 1:50 dilution of Adox Rodinal, and I'll be using the absolutely massive 90 to 180 millimeter f5.6 lens. I don't know how these are going to turn out because I don't know about this lens, but let's check it out.
Sometimes you just have to embrace the grain. While Rodinal may not be your first choice for developing Double-X, what you can get out of it is absolutely incredible, especially if you're shooting in 120. So I keep it in my back pocket in case I need to get a bump in both contrast and edge sharp, but watch out for light conditioning. Shooting under open shadow, medium contrast, and low contrast conditions is best when developing with Rodinal because you get that contrast bump without being too harsh as under hard open light. The edge sharpness is certainly increased, but on medium format you don't get as much of a bump in visible grain, but it certainly shows a lot more in 35mm. Not my favorite combination, but it works in a pinch.
Okay, there's that roll done, and I am not going to miss using this lens. This was not a fun lens to use. But that's beside the point because the film inside is going to look amazing. Which leads us on to roll number 4 and a developer that I've never used with Double-X before. I'll see you just a little bit over there in a moment. Okay, so we finally made it. We are on to the 4th and final roll. Like the previous one, I'm going to be exposing the roll of film at ASA 250 and going to be developing it in Compard R09 Spezial, also known as Bellini Hydrofin or Agfa-Studional. This is my first time actually using this combination, so I'm going into this completely blind, but I know what Studional can do, and I'm actually going to be using the hydrofin time and dilution of 1:39, and I'm going to be shooting it through the 100mm f4 macro, and I have the life-size adapter slapped onto it, so I'm going to try a few things new. So without further ado, let's go.
I honestly shouldn't be surprised that I got excellent results from R09 Spezial. I pulled the negatives from the tank and immediately fell in love with these results. Now, the one thing you will have to note is that there's actually no official listed time under either R09 Spezial or Agfa-Studional. Instead, you have to look at Bellini Hydrofin, which has a time for a 1:39 dilution. There is a bit of a payoff though. There is a slight increase in visible grain, but you get a bump in edge sharpness, and it actually makes the grain structure look really good, much better than what I found with Rodinal. Plus, you don't get much of a hit on your contrast. In fact, the contrast looks brilliant, almost as if you are developing it in a far more dilute, far longer developing cycle. And that's the real kicker with Hydrofin and R09 Spezial. The developing time is only 5.25 minutes. Great if you're pushed for time. I definitely will be keeping this one in my back pocket a lot more than using Rodinal, as long as I can get more Studional into my collection.
All right, so that's all 4 rolls shot, and it's time to get these into the tank and get developed. But if you're probably wondering at this point, what about Kodak D96? It is the dedicated motion picture film developer. Well, you're gonna wanna stay tuned because I've shot a lot of Double-X and I've developed it in a lot of different developers. So today, unlike when I first started using Eastman Double-X, there is a lot more readily available developing times for this film stock. And that's one of the great parts about the film photography community, is that we all get together and we try and experiment and figure stuff out and then publish things online. So really, in my main body of this review, I only showed you a small sliver of what you can do and how you can develop your Double-X film. So what else can you use? Well, almost anything, and I haven't met a developer that didn't like Double-X. So the first obvious choice for Eastman Double-X is Kodak D96. Now this is their dedicated black and white negative developer. It is the same family of developers as D23 and D76. But the nice thing is that where you have to dilute your D76 1:1 to get amazing tones, you can do D96 stock and get almost the exact same results. Now the published time is 6.5 minutes, but I found that that overcooks the film a little too much when you're shooting it at ASA 200, so I've dropped it down to 6 minutes. And it really makes Double-X sing. You get an absolutely glorious amount of tonality, contrast, along with fine grain and added edge sharpness as well. And it works well for both the 120 and the 35mm versions of the film. And one of the best parts about D96 is that not only has the chemical guide been published online, you can also buy pre-mixed kits either from CineStill or from the Film Photography Project. I have a D96 pouch from the FPP. It's just, I don't shoot enough cinefilm to actually mix it up, and I really wish I had one of the smaller. Other than D96, another favorite combination with Double-X is Zone Imaging's 510 Pyro. Now, I already have a great love of all Pyro developers, and 510 Pyro just makes it all the more accessible. You don't need to have those two parts to mix up your working solution. And it really does enhance a lot of the good about Double-X. You get that amazing tonality. It makes it incredibly more scannable because you have a lot of really good shadow recovery, and it really plays to that latitude that you get with Double-X. Plus, it makes the edges even more sharp than they are. Now, the trade-off is that in the 35mm you do get a bit more visible grain, not too much, but in medium format it is just absolutely glorious what you can do with 510 Pyro and Eastman Double-X. Now, if you really want to play on the available latitude of D96, your next developer of choice would be Diafine. Now, Diafine is lauded as a universal black and white developer, but with Diafine you can actually underexpose your Double-X by a couple of shots, exposing it at ASA 640 and then doing a regular 3+3 development with Diafine, and it comes out looking normal. You get a lot more contrast than you would expect. It has much more. It does tighten up the latitude of the film, but don't worry about that because you don't see really an increase in grain, and it just makes it incredible to shoot indoors using natural light, and it works really well. I really like the results that I got out of Diafine and Double-X, even with that underexposure. One developer that surprised me in the sense that I wasn't 100% happy with the results was Adox FX39II. Now, I usually like what FX39II does with film stocks because you get consistent results no matter what dilution you use. And the contrast and tonality of the film were dead on the money. Don't get me wrong, it does a wonderful job. The one thing that really surprised me is that it did increase the amount of visible grain when giving it that extra edge sharpness. It almost looks as if what you would get with Rodinal and Double-X in 35mm. Now, I haven't tried it in medium format. I did want to give that a go for this review, but I ended up going with a Compard R09 Spezial. But there's, again, nothing wrong, and I'm sure that if you use FX39 in medium with the medium format Double-X, it will be a lot nicer, but it's just personally not one that I'll use again. Nothing against anything, but it's just not to my taste, but not a bad choice if that's all you have available to you. Now, I also used two a little more obscure developers with this other than Diafine, and the first is Photospeed FD10. And let me tell you, I wish I could get my hands on this developer a lot more because it does an absolutely amazing job with Double-X. And one of the best parts about the roll of film I shot is that I did a lot of work indoors, and I shot my Mamiya M645 very much like how I would shoot a 4x5 camera, in the sense that I used a spot meter and I metered for the shadows and then underexposed by a stop, and it really shows off the amazing latitude and forgiveness that you get with Double-X, because the results both from inside in mixed lit churches and outdoor in high contrast bright sunlight is just absolutely amazing. Plus, it really shows off again that tonality, the contrast, and the fine grain and edge sharpness that you come to expect with Double-X. And I really wish I had known about this sooner because it's just an absolutely amazing combination. So if you can get your hands on FD10, either under the Photospeed branding or Burger branding, it is well worth the effort if you love Double-X and really want to bring out the best. It almost as if you were developing it in D96 with the results. Now, the other developer, and I wasn't 100% fond of the results, is Formulary FX2. And if you want edge sharpness, you will get it with FX2. Now, this is a hard developer to work with. I wasn't 100% happy with all the results I got, and the main reason is that it does make the grain a lot more visible, a lot more than even Rodinal does. It does give you that nice tonality, that nice contrast. Don't worry, it doesn't make your Double-X look bad. It really makes it crunchy, if anything, like super sharp, super crunchy. a lot of visible grain. So if that's not your thing, I don't recommend FX2, but a lot of people don't use FX2. So you really don't have anything to worry about there. And even with that tiny amount that I have given you, there is way more combinations out there. Some other ones that I've used is FA1027 or Clayton F76 Plus, Kodak T-Max developer, even old Kodak DK50. Not to mention you can play around with all the different dilutions from HC110 and Ilfotec HC. There's also Xtol. You name it, it is available, and the information is all online. So you can really get to know the film and get to develop it and make it look the way you want it to. When it comes to developing Double-X, there is no special trick, tip, or technique. In fact, it's thanks to the fact that it is a motion picture film that has a wide tolerance for variances in time and temperature that makes it super simple to develop at home. The one thing you do want to keep in mind is to try to be as consistent as possible when it comes to temperature and time variances, but that's not always realistic within a home development environment. It handles any sort of developing technique and method that you have, either through a manual hand tank agitation or through a mechanical process like a Jobo or a Bees processor, or any similar solution that you use. When it comes to loading the film onto your reels, I always use Patterson reels, and I've never run into any sort of difficulty getting it loaded onto the plastic reels, especially if they are 100% bone dry. I don't use stainless steel, I never have, so I have no experience in loading Double-X onto the stainless steel reels. So if you have, please leave a comment below to let other viewers of this video know your experience when it comes to loading Double-X. The biggest problem I have with Double-X is how badly it cups during the drying process. It really doesn't matter what time of year or how I develop it and how carefully I keep that temperature under control, it always cups. In fact, it cups so bad it reminds me of Kodak Tri-X, and that's both with 35mm and 120. Short of building or purchasing a dedicated film dryer, which just is not feasible for my living state, the best thing I've found is to let it hang to dry for a good 24 hours at the minimum. It's okay if you let it go for about 12, but then you want to leave it back rolled for another 24 to 48 hours. That will get it flat enough that it will make your scanning so much easier. When it comes to scanning, I've done all my scanning through a Epson V700 or V500, my older scanner, flatbed scanner, using the stock Epson film holders. Again, once I get that cupping mitigated far enough, the scanning goes quite easily, and I've scanned with both the Epson scan software and my current solution, Silverfast 9 SE. I found that it does a really good job in getting those negatives scanned to a point where I only need to do minor adjustments within Photoshop just to get those levels and curves to where I want it, and do any cropping and cleaning up the dust and adding a little bit of sharpening to it, because I found with flatbeds you don't always get the sharpest scan. The problem comes when I try to scan using a dedicated film scanner like a Nikon Coolscan 5. The problem comes with the shape of the sprocket holes. It uses Double-X in 35mm, uses motion picture style sprocket holes, which are a different shape from standard 35mm still photography film, and I think that the scanner doesn't really handle it that well. But yeah, that's the only complaint I have. I don't do digital camera scanning, but I have found results online, and they're just as good using any sort of software solution like Negative Lab Pro to bring it into that positive and make the necessary adjustments. Well, folk, that's about covers it for this video. I hope I have at least given you a baseline to start working with Eastman Double-X if you haven't yet, or if you've tried it and haven't liked it, maybe I've inspired you to pick it up again and try it in a different format, a different camera, or a different developer to really see what you want. And one of the best parts about Double-X is that it is today so widely available. Not only can you buy the bulk 100-foot rolls and bulk load it yourself, it's also available pre-rolled in cassettes from all sorts of resellers. CineStill and the Film Photography Project. There's also Reflex Lab and a ton of other tiny film respoolers out there. It is just well worth the effort if you want to try something a little bit out of the norm from what you're used to. So let me know in the comments, have you actually shot Double-X in a motion picture camera? If you haven't have that video online in any format, Super 8, 16mm, 35mm, please leave me a comment with a link. I would love to see what this looks like from outside of the professional Hollywood production. Do you shoot Double-X as a still film stock? I would love to hear what developers you like and what you like and dislike about the film. Again, just leave me a comment. I do my best to reply to everyone who does. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, hitting that bell notification icon to be notified when I publish new content in 2024. These are coming out on Wednesdays. And yeah, even still, if you don't want to do any of that, that's cool. At least leave me a thumbs up. Every little bit counts. And until next time, my friends, shoot what you love, with what you love, on what you love. Don't give in to the hype. And the agent persona will be back next year. Hey folks, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching this video through to the end. This was my first film review video, and there were a lot of major moving parts too that went into this video's production. It took a grand total, it was filmed over the course of about 3 weeks, with about maybe a week and a half of full working days. It probably explained why things changed, clothing changed, conditions changed all throughout it, because I just had to film stuff whenever I got the chance. This is the first of what I hope to be many different film review videos. Some will look similar to this, some won't. So as always, you guys are awesome for continuing to view. I'm almost close to 2,000 subscribers, which I never thought I would reach. And the amount of positivity I just get from everyone is absolutely amazing. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. And yeah, I just really had a lot of fun doing this. It's something new, it's something different for the channel, and something I am definitely going to be continuing on both through this year and into next year. All right, take care, people.